Porter. On the fourth anniversary of the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris that killed 12 people, a study into terror attacks in France suggests that almost all of the jihadists behind the 22 incidents since 2012 were known to authorities before the attacks were carried out. The study by the international security think tank Globsec suggests that all non-nationals or dual nationals convicted of radicalization should be immediately deported to their country of origin. Olivier Guitta is from the international risk consultancy Globsec and contributed to the study. He explained what the study involved.
There were 22 attacks since 2012 and 18 since 2015. In terms of the number, our report was looking into the people that were on the radar of security services, the ones that were jailed and what their radicalization process has been, and if they were criminals or not. The whole crime terror nexus was the whole idea behind the Globsec report. It's a long-term project, and we're going to do many nations, including the UK, later in the year.
In regards to France, so what specifically were you looking at? What were the key findings that you found?
So 97% of the jihadists that carried out attacks since 2012 were known to law enforcement, including 82% that were known to the services for radicalization. That's a huge number when you have all this rhetoric about lone wolves, people that are not on the radar, people that are not known. This is exactly the opposite that happens. I mean, just 3% that were not known to security services is extremely high. What is interesting is that in terms of the terror watch list that France has put together, that has 29,000 people on it, 79% of those jihadists behind those attacks were one way or another on either French terror watch list or on another nation. In that case, it was Europol and Belgium. So it means that the people that carried out the attacks were one way or another very well known, because they were either known by the police or the security services. They were on a watch list, and that's extremely problematic when we see politicians today in France using statistics that are completely erroneous. So just last week, the Minister of Interior of France said that 40% only of people that carried out attacks were on that terror watch list, which our research showed that it's totally understating the fact. So those are some of the important points. But the last one that I think your audience should know about, and that is linked to our call regarding the Christmas market in Strasbourg attack, is that 19% of the jihadists that we looked at were multiple offenders. And if you remember, Sheriff Shekat had been known for 27 convictions. So there might be something for security services to look at in terms of the profile of an individual that is in prison and that has been convicted many times. The psychology might tell you that he has nothing to lose, and that obviously in jail he needs to find some new ground and is more prone to being radicalized. But that's some of the points that are extremely prescient and that security services should be looking at, but also politicians.
Of course, and statistics themselves can often be misleading, as you know, and in the hands of politicians, well, they serve a purpose, don't they? They often serve a political purpose. But I wonder whether one of the issues is that when you say many of these people who were responsible for terror attacks had been known to the authorities, but it's in what context were they known to the authorities? There'll be many people who have got multiple convictions for all sorts of things in France and elsewhere who, for, don't necessarily make it onto the watch list because they don't pose or they don't seem to pose a threat. It's how you look at that data about what they've done, what they've been accused of, how far they've gone in trying to achieve their political or radical ends and that kind of thing. Is there maybe something that's being lost in translation then?
Yes, a few things. I mean, you hit the right point, and that's what can be shown as the fact that 79% were on a European terror watch list. So those people that carried out the attacks were not, criminals, petty criminals, or thieves, or criminals of that nature, but they were right away, when the security services knew about it, put on that watch list, and some of them were monitored. So I understand what you're saying in terms of multiple offenders, but when we look at the stats of 79% on the watch list and 82% known to the services for radicalization, then you basically close the gap. But what is extremely important for your audience to remember is that there's a big issue in terms of what to do with the people that are on that terror watch list. And unfortunately, the current government under Macron has decided to put that whole debate under the rug, and it's been taken by the far right and Marine Le Pen as one of her main selling point is to say, look, if those people are foreigners or dual nationals, they're on that terror watch list, they should be deported. And that measure is supported by 83% of the French population. And the government has decided not to talk about this, but they're leaving the field open for the far right to run with this idea. And when you see what the neighbor is doing, Italy, for instance, they have this no tolerance policy for either dual nationals or foreigners, that when they're convicted of radicalization, after the judge has decided that they're guilty, within an hour they're put on the plane and sent to their country of origin. So Italy has deported over 350 people in the past 2 years, and it has not suffered any terror attack, while Italy is on the top list of targets for Islamic State, for instance. I'm not saying that their policy stopped those attacks, but it's a rather intriguing coincidence that they're one of the only nations still in Europe that has not weathered a jihadist attack.
Is Globsec then in favour of what some people might consider the extreme position of the far right, as you enunciated about Marine Le Pen there, that anybody who finds themselves on the terror watch list, whether they've been convicted of a crime or not, should be deported at that point if they're not a French national or if they're of dual citizenship? Or do you support the Italian model where somebody, once they're convicted of whether it be terror-related actions or radicalization, whatever it might be, that at that point they should be deported?
I'm much more of the school of the Italian model that makes a lot of sense. And what they do is, if there's an individual that has been in prison and known to prison authorities as being radicalized and he's a foreigner, then his case is looked at extremely closely by a judge, and then the judge can decide that he has to be kicked out even though he's in jail. So yes, the sheer number of people that we know of that are on the French list and that are foreigners is 15%. So you're talking 15%, it's 3,000 people. And you can imagine if you have to go through the files of 3,000 people, then it's going to take a long time. But if the Italian model were to be applied, then that could possibly work indeed.
Yeah, it's how to balance that. And Italy started off by doing that. So it's quite straightforward in Italy that they've always done that. So they'll continue to take it from that position. But whereas France hasn't always done that, it would need some intervention by politicians to now bring out about the legal issues. And there will be many issues about freedom of speech or otherwise that might arise as a result of this. How difficult would that be then for the French government to take such a step?
I think you have a different situation when you compare the immigration in Italy and the immigration in France. In Italy, most of the Muslim population is not Italian. So they're either Tunisian, Algerian, Moroccan. So it's a much more straightforward view. Whereas the French Muslim immigration started a few generations back. And, most of the Muslims living in France are French. So it's a totally different factor. So that's why I'm pointing out of the fact of those 15% on that list in France that are foreigners, whereas in Italy the number is much higher, and therefore for them it's a much more standardized view. But I see your point in terms of the freedom of expression, the legality of things. And we've seen in the past that even to deport a radical imam in France that has been on record as pushing for people to join the jihad or hatred for infidels or go after Westerners anywhere, it's been extremely difficult in terms of the legality of things. So sometimes they've been able to kick out some of the radical imams, but in some cases, those imams were allowed back through the European Courts of Human Rights. So you are exactly correct. I mean, it has to be done in conjunction with a beefing up of the law and getting things in order, because even for them to deport 10 or 12 imams a year has been really very difficult in France.
That's Olivier Guitta there from the international risk consultancy Globsec.